The Ryukyu Rhythm, a Jamaican dancer's journey to Okinawa. Zara was the Queen of Kingston Dancehall, but she was hollow inside. To find her lost rhythm, she follows her grandfather's old journal to the ancient hills of Shuri, Okinawa. Witness a cinematic fusion of Jamaican Tallawa spirit and Okinawan karate discipline. Can a dancer learn the power of the stone? Discover the Blasian connection in this story of roots, resilience, and the rhythm that unites the islands of the world.
This is the Ryukyu Rhythm. Chapter 1. The Broken Beat. The humidity in the Kingston National Arena was a living thing. It draped over the 3,000 spectators like a damp, heavy cloak, smelling of sweat, adrenaline, and the faint, spicy tang of jerk chicken from the street vendors outside. In the center of the stage, under a spotlight so white it felt blinding, Zara was a blur of mahogany skin and neon blue spandex. The music, a heavy, aggressive dancehall track with a bass line that rattled the ribs, was her heartbeat. Or at least, it used to be. Her movements were technically flawless. She executed a split drop into a head top with a precision that made the crowd roar. She caught every syncopated snare hit, every pull-up of the track. She was the reigning queen of the Kingston Street Dance Finals, and for the last 4 minutes, she had performed like a machine designed for victory. But as the music cut out and the roar of the crowd faded into a breathless silence, Zara felt nothing. No rush, no fire. Just a cold, echoing hollow in the center of her chest. She stood center stage, chest heaving, sweat dripping from her nose onto the scuffed wooden floor. She looked at the panel of judges. 3 legends of the Jamaican dance scene sat behind a long table, their faces unreadable. The lead judge, a woman known as Mama G, a pioneer of the old-school rocksteady and ska movements, slowly leaned into her microphone. "Zara," Mama G said, her voice a low, gravelly rumble that carried across the arena. "You have the feet of a goddess and the timing of a clock." The crowd cheered, but Mama G raised a hand for silence. "But your dance is hollow," she continued, her amber eyes piercing through Zara's defensive posture. "You move like you're afraid of the music. You're hitting the notes, but you aren't feeling the spirit. There is no root in your step, girl. You've lost your rhythm." The scorecards went up. 7, 6, 6. Zara didn't wait for the official announcement. She didn't stay to see the crown pass to a younger girl with less technique but more soul. She grabbed her bag and walked out of the arena, the cool night air of Kingston hitting her like a slap. 2 hours later, Zara stood in the middle of a 9-night street dance in Trenchtown. The sound system, a wall of speakers 10 feet high, was pumping out a deep, soulful roots reggae track. People were dancing all around her. Old men moved with a slow, swaying dignity. Young boys performed acrobatic feats. Women winced and skanked with a joy that seemed to defy the poverty of the neighborhood.
Zara stood in the center of the storm, perfectly still. The music was loud, loud enough to drown out a jet engine, but to her, it felt like static. She tried to move her feet, tried to find that one drop beat that had been her compass since she was 5 years old, but her body felt heavy. Her feet felt like lead. She watched a woman nearby, a grandmother in a floral dress, move her hips with a simple, grounded power. The woman wasn't performing, she was being. Her feet were planted firmly in the dust, her energy rising from the earth itself. "That's what I'm missing," Zara thought, a lump forming in her throat. The root. She realized that for years she had been dancing for the judges, for the cameras, for the likes on social media. She had turned her heritage into a commodity, and in the process, the beat had broken. She was a world-class dancer who could no longer hear the music. She walked away from the street dance, the bass fading into the distance. She reached her small apartment, a room filled with trophies that now looked like cheap plastic trinkets. She sat on her bed, the silence of the room louder than the speakers had been. "I'm done," she whispered to the dark. "If I can't feel it, I won't do it." She began to pull a suitcase from under her bed, intending to pack away her dancing shoes for good. But as she dragged the heavy trunk out, it snagged on a loose floorboard, prying it up. Tucked into the dusty space beneath the floor was a small, leather-bound book. It was weathered, the edges frayed by sea salt and time. Zara frowned, picking it up. She recognized the handwriting on the inside cover immediately. It was the elegant, cursive script of her grandfather, a merchant sailor who had spent 40 years traveling the world before settling back in the hills of St. Elizabeth. She opened the journal to a random page. There were no maps or logs of cargo. Instead, there was a detailed sketch of a creature that looked like a cross between a lion and a dog, a Shisa lion, and beneath it, a single sentence that stopped her heart. "In the islands of the East, I saw a dance that moved without music. It was a silent rhythm of the soul, a strength that came from the stone. I have never seen a Jamaican man move with such peace, nor a warrior move with such grace. It is the Ryukyu rhythm." Zara ran her fingers over the sketch. She thought of Mama G's words, "No root in your step." She looked at the small amount of prize money she had left in her drawer, the remains of her last championship. It was just enough for a one-way ticket. "The islands of the East," she murmured, her eyes fixing on the word Okinawa scrawled in the margin. She didn't pack her dance shoes. She packed the journal, a single pair of sturdy boots, and the broken pieces of her heart. She was going to find the silent dance.
Chapter 2. The Grandfather's Compass. The ceiling fan in Zara's apartment spun with a low, rhythmic click-clack, a sound that used to feel like a beat, but now felt like a countdown. Outside, the sounds of Kingston, the distant honking of coaster buses and the smell of roasting saltfish, seemed to belong to a world she was no longer a part of. Zara sat on her floor, surrounded by the remnants of her life as a dancer. Glittering costumes were shoved into trash bags. Her professional portfolios, filled with photos of her at peak performance, were stacked like firewood. In the center of the chaos sat her grandfather's journal. She turned the pages carefully. Her grandfather, Pupa Joe, had always been a man of few words and long silences. She remembered him sitting on his porch in St. Elizabeth, staring at the horizon as if he could see the other side of the world. Now, through his ink, he was finally speaking. August 14th, 1972, Naha Port. The entry read, "The heat here is heavy, just like back home, but the air tastes different. Less salt, more pine. They call this place the land of propriety, but I see the fire in them. They are island people. They know the hurricane. They know what it is to be small and stand against the big wind."
Zara paused. She had always thought of Japan as a place of high-tech neon and rigid robots, but Pupa Joe described a world of coral stone walls, red-tiled roofs, and a people who, like Jamaicans, had been forged by the sea and survival. She flipped to a page with a pressed dried flower, a bright red hibiscus, identical to the ones that grew in her mother's garden. Beneath it, Joe had written, "I saw the men in the village of Shuri today. They were practicing what they call tea. No music, no shouting, just the sound of their breath and the wind hitting their fists. It looked like a dance, but it felt like a prayer. It wasn't about being fast. It was about being unmovable. I thought of our people back home, how we dance to let the spirit out. These people dance to keep the spirit in. I need to understand that stillness. My feet are too restless." Zara felt a shiver. To keep the spirit in. She had spent her whole life throwing her energy outward, begging for the world to notice her. Was that why she felt so empty? Because she had nothing left inside? As she reached into the back of the trunk to find a bag, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. She pulled out a heavy, brass compass. It was tarnished, but when she rubbed a glass, she saw that the cardinal points weren't just N, S, E, and W. Next to the English letters were hand-etched Japanese kanji. She held the compass in her palm. The needle didn't spin wildly. It settled firmly, pointing toward the window, toward the north, toward the east. "Okay, Pupa Joe," she whispered. "I'm following the needle." The next few days were a blur of frantic preparation.
She sold her television, her high-end sound system, and her designer sneakers. She went to the Japanese embassy, her heart racing as she waited for the visa stamps. She visited Mama G one last time. The old woman was sitting in her small garden, drinking ginger tea. She didn't look surprised to see Zara with a backpack. "You're leaving the island to find the island," Mama G said, her voice like wind through dry grass. "I'm going to Okinawa," Zara replied. "My grandfather, he saw something there, a silent dance." Mama G nodded slowly. "Joe always was a seeker. Just remember, Zara, you can travel 10,000 miles, but if you don't take your heart with you, you're just a tourist. That Okinawan stone is hard. It will either polish you or break you. Be ready for the friction." Zara hugged the old woman, the scent of lavender and cedar clinging to her. "I'm ready to be polished, Mama G."
The flight was a grueling 30-hour journey through time zones and clouds. Zara watched the world change through the small oval window. The lush, vibrant greens of Jamaica faded into the steel grays of transit airports, then into the sprawling blue of the Pacific. She spent the layovers staring at the compass. She felt like a duppy, a ghost, haunting the space between her old life and whatever waited across the ocean. She practiced the few Japanese phrases she had memorized, her Jamaican accent making the vowels rounder, more melodic. As the pilot announced the descent into Naha, Okinawa, Zara felt a sudden, terrifying jolt of reality. She was a black woman from Kingston, alone, with no plan other than a 50-year-old journal and a feeling in her gut. She stepped off the plane and was immediately hit by the air. It was thick, humid, and smelled of sea salt and something sweet, blooming jasmine. She closed her eyes. For a split second, if she ignored the Japanese signs and the bowing officials, she could have been standing at the Norman Manley International Airport. She pulled the compass from her pocket. The needle was steady. "I'm here, Pupa Joe," she breathed. She walked toward the exit, her mahogany skin glowing under the fluorescent lights, her neon blue hair a defiant flag in a sea of black and gray. She was the RHYTHEM's newest student, and she didn't even know the first step. Chapter 3. Lost in Shuri. Naha was a neon blur of monorails and bustling markets, but as Zara took the bus toward the hills of Shuri, the modern world began to peel away. The glass and steel of the city were replaced by walls made of jagged, sun-bleached coral, and roofs topped with fiery red tiles. The heat was a familiar friend, a heavy, tropical weight that Zara recognized from the streets of Kingston. But the sound was wrong. In Jamaica, the heat was always accompanied by a soundtrack, a distant radio, the shout of a street vendor, the rhythmic thrum of a passing car's bass. Here, the heat was silent. As Zara walked through the winding, narrow lanes of the ancient Shuri district, the silence began to unnerve her. It wasn't just quiet, it was a deliberate, heavy stillness. Every time her heavy boots hit the pavement, the sound echoed against the stone walls like a drumbeat. People moved past her with a quiet, efficient grace, nodding politely but keeping their eyes forward. Her neon blue hair felt like a neon sign flashing in a library. "Pupa Joe, where did you find a dance in all this hush?" she whispered, her voice feeling too loud in the stillness. She spent hours wandering, her phone's GPS struggling with the labyrinth of old alleys. She felt like a trespasser in a ghost city. Her feet were starting to blister, and the old frustration began to bubble up, the feeling that she was chasing a shadow, that the rhythm she was looking for didn't exist. Just as she was about to turn back toward the bus stop, she caught a scent on the wind. It wasn't the sea. It was the sharp, clean smell of freshly sanded wood and incense. She followed the scent around a sharp bend and found a gate, a simple wooden entrance tucked behind a massive, ancient banyan tree. There was no sign, only two weathered Shisa lions guarding the threshold, their stone mouths open as if in a silent roar. Zara pushed the gate open. It didn't creak, it slid with a buttery smoothness. Inside was a garden that felt like a sanctuary. White gravel was raked into perfect concentric circles around moss-covered stones. A small koi pond gurgled softly in the corner. But it was the man in the center of the clearing who stopped Zara's breath. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a frame that looked like it had been carved out of ironwood. He wore a simple, sleeveless white gi, and his feet were bare against the packed earth. This was Sensei Kaito. He wasn't fighting an opponent. He was performing a kata. His movements were slow, agonizingly slow. He stepped forward, his foot gripping the earth like a root. He moved his arm in a block, then a strike, but there was no snap or flash. Instead, there was a terrifying sense of density.
Zara watched, transfixed. As a dancer, she understood motion, but she had never seen anything like this. Kaito didn't seem to be moving through the air. He seemed to be moving with it. The air around him seemed to thicken, to vibrate with a low-frequency energy that Zara felt in the soles of her own feet. It was the silent dance Pupa Joe had written about. He finished the sequence, his hands coming together in a slow, deliberate ritual. He stood perfectly still, his eyes closed. For a moment, he looked like another stone in the garden. "You have been standing there for 10 minutes, Jamaican," Kaito said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble. He didn't turn around. He didn't even open his eyes. Zara jumped, her heart hammering. How you know I'm Jamaican?" Kaito turned slowly. His face was a map of deep lines, his eyes as dark and steady as the deep ocean. He looked at her mahogany skin, her blue hair, and finally, the weathered journal clutched in her hand. "The air in this garden is quiet," he said, stepping toward her. "You arrived with the sound of a storm. You carry much noise in your spirit. It is the rhythm of your island." Zara straightened her back, her old Kingston pride flaring. "My island has a heart, Sensei. We move because we're alive." Kaito stopped a few feet from her. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. "Movement without purpose is just a tantrum of the body. You come here looking for the silent dance, but your feet do not know how to be still." He glanced at the journal. "That book, I recognize the hand that wrote it. Joseph." Zara's eyes widened. "You knew my grandfather?"
Kaito looked at the ancient banyan tree, a flicker of something like a memory passing over his face. He was a sailor who forgot how to sail because he fell in love with the stone. He was a loud man who learned the value of a whisper. Kaito looked back at Zara, his gaze heavy and clinical. "You have his eyes, but you have the restlessness of a bird in a cage. Why are you here, Zara?" "Because I lost my beat," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "And I think the stone has it." Kaito stared at her for a long beat. The silence returned, but this time, Zara didn't try to break it. She waited. "The stone does not give," Kaito said finally, turning back to the center of the garden. "It only allows. Come back tomorrow at dawn. If you are still here when the sun touches the shisa, we will see if the stone has anything to say to you." He didn't say goodbye. He simply began the slow, vibrating movement again, vanishing back into his silent rhythm.
Chapter 4. The Request for Rhythm. The sun was still a bruised purple smear below the horizon when Zara arrived back at the gate. The air was so thick with humidity it felt like breathing through a wet silk veil. Her legs ached from the previous day's wandering, but the rhythm of her grandfather's compass had kept her awake all night, a steady magnetic pull in her chest. She stood by the shisa lions, watching the light slowly turn the coral walls from gray to a pale, ghostly pink. Exactly when the first sliver of gold touched the open mouth of the stone lion, the wooden door slid open. Kaito didn't say good morning. He was dressed in the same white gi, carrying a wooden bucket and a stiff bristled brush. He set them at Zara's feet. "The steps," he said, pointing to the long, steep coral stone stairs leading up to the main dojo. "Scrub. No soap, just water and your own weight." Zara blinked. She was a 3-time dance hall champion. She had come across the world for this silent dance, and he was handing her a chore for a schoolgirl. "Sensei, I didn't come here to be a maid," Zara said, her Kingston sass sharpening her tone. "I come to move, to learn the style Pupa Joe wrote about." Kaito stopped and looked at her, his eyes like 2 dark stones underwater. "You want to move?
You have spent your life moving. Your problem, Jamaican, is that you do not know how to stop. Your heart is full of noise, ambition, pride, the roar of the crowd. You cannot hear the stone if you are shouting at it. He stepped closer, his presence expanding until Zara felt small, despite her height. The dance you know is a firework. It is bright, it is loud, and it is over in a second. Okinawan tea is the mountain. The mountain does not move for the firework. Scrub the steps. If you want the rhythm, you must first learn the silence of the stone. He turned and walked back into the dojo, the door clicking shut behind him. Zara stared at the bucket. She thought about the national arena. She thought about the judges calling her hollow. A surge of irritation rose in her throat. Who him think him is? But then she remembered the way the air had vibrated around his fists. She dropped to her knees, gripped the brush, and began to scrub. By noon, the sun was a white-hot hammer. Zara's neon blue hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her knuckles were raw from the jagged coral stone. In Kingston, she would have been dancing to a heavy bass line, her body light and explosive. Here, she was a tethered beast, her energy trapped in the repetitive, grinding motion of the brush. On the second day, it rained, a sudden, violent Okinawan downpour that turned the garden into a misty cathedral. Zara didn't stop. She scrubbed through the deluge, her clothes soaked, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She felt a rhythm starting to form, but it wasn't a dance. It was a slow, agonizing pulse of endurance.
Is this it? She yelled into the rain, the patois thick in her voice. You think a little rain gwine break me? I'm from the land of Hurricane Star. Scrubbing stone is play business. Kaito watched her from the shadows of the porch. He saw the fire in her, but more importantly, he saw that she hadn't looked at her watch once. She wasn't timing her labor, she was losing herself in it. On the third day, the steps were white, blindingly clean. Zara stood at the top, her hands trembling, her ego battered into submission by the sheer monotony of the task. Kaito emerged. He carried a crisp, folded white uniform and a simple white cotton belt. The steps are clean, Kaito said quietly, but the stone is still harder than you. He handed her the uniform. The white belt is not a prize, Zara. In my dojo, it is a shroud. It is the color of death, the death of who you were. If you wear it, you are no longer a queen. You are nothing. Only when you are nothing can the rhythm find a place to live. Zara took the belt. She felt the weight of the heavy canvas. For the first time in her life, she didn't want the spotlight. She wanted the shroud. I'm ready to die then, sensei, she said, her voice steady. Then enter, Kaito replied. As she stepped across the threshold of the dojo, the smell of old wood and hard work enveloped her. She didn't know that the real breaking was only just beginning.
Chapter 5. The Weight of Stillness. The white gi was heavy. Unlike the lycra and mesh Zara wore in Kingston, clothes designed to disappear so her body could shine, the heavy canvas of the karate uniform felt like a cage. It restricted her air, muffled her light, and forced her to confront the raw shape of her own frame. Sanchin, Kaito said, his voice flat. The three battles, mind, body, and spirit. If one is weak, the others are just ghosts. He moved her into the stance. It was the most unnatural thing Zara had ever experienced. Her feet were turned inward, pigeon-toed, gripping the wooden floorboards. Her knees were bent toward each other, her pelvis tucked, her spine a straight, rigid line of iron. Her fists were pulled back to her ribs, elbows tucked so tight they bruised her sides. Now, Kaito commanded, do not move. In dancehall, stillness was a transition, a momentary freeze to emphasize a beat before exploding back into motion. But here, the stillness was the destination. 5 minutes in, Zara's thighs began to tremble. In Kingston, she could head top for 10 minutes or whine for an hour without breaking a sweat, but this static tension was a different beast. It was a war against her own nervous system.
You are shaken, Jamaican, Kaito murmured, walking a slow circle around her. Why? My muscles, they aren't used to this, Zara wheezed, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. No, Kaito said, his hand suddenly striking her shoulder. Not a blow, but a heavy, grounding pressure. Your muscles are used to being seen, they are used to being fast, but they have no root. You are like a tall tree with shallow soil. A Kingston breeze would knock you over. He stepped in front of her. Breath. From the tanden, the center. Force the air out like you are pushing a stone. He demonstrated a sharp, guttural ibuki breath, a sound like a bellows forcing air through hot coals. Zara tried to mirror him. She pushed the air out, but it came out high and thin. Clack. Kaito struck her thigh with a bamboo cane, not hard enough to bruise, but enough to shock. Lower. Tighten the glutes, turn the feet. If I push you, you must be the floor itself. For the next 4 hours, the dojo became a torture chamber of silence. Every time Zara's mind drifted to the music she missed, or the pride she felt back home, her stance would falter, and Kaito's cane would find a soft spot.
"You think you are strong because you can jump high," Kaito said, his voice echoing in the rafters. "But that is just gravity's permission. True strength is the floor's refusal to move. Your dance back home, it was a scream. Here, we learn the power of the silence that comes before the scream." Zara's vision began to tunnel. Sweat poured off her chin, soaking the white canvas of her gi until it turned translucent against her mahogany skin. She felt a familiar voice in her head, the judges' voices, hollow, surface, no root. She realized then, with a crushing weight, that they were right. Every dance she had ever won was built on a lie. She had used her beauty and her speed to hide the fact that she was terrified of standing still. If she stopped moving, she had to face the emptiness. Thump. Kaito punched her in the solar plexus. It wasn't a full strike, but it was enough to send her reeling. She collapsed to her knees, gasping, her neon blue hair falling over her eyes. "The stone does not give," Kaito said, looking down at her. "You are trying to dance with the pain. Stop. Be the pain. Accept the weight." Zara looked up at him, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and realization. She didn't get up like a dancer, with a flourish and a smile. She stood up like a woman dragging herself out of a wreck. She found the Sanchin stance again. She tucked her pelvis. She gripped the floor. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she didn't listen her a baseline. She listened to the blood rushing in her own ears. In, out, push the stone. Kaito watched her. He saw the shift in her shoulders. The noise in her heart was still there, but it was being compressed, forged into something denser. "Again," he said. That night, Zara lay on the floor of her small room, her muscles twitching in a rhythmic, agonizing pulse. She looked at her grandfather's journal. "The Okinawan stone is hard," Pupajo had written, "but it is the only thing that can teach a restless man where he begins and the world ends." Zara fell asleep with her fists clenched, her body finally learning the rhythm of the stone.
Chapter 6. Echoes of the Yard. The midnight air in Shuri was a heavy silk, cool on the skin but thick in the lungs. Inside the dojo, the only light came from a single paper lantern and the pale blue-white moon spilling across the polished floorboards. Zara couldn't sleep. The silence of Okinawa was no longer peaceful. It was a vacuum, begging to be filled. Her muscles, forged in the fires of Sanchin stance, felt like coiled springs. She stood in the center of the room, wearing her white gi, the belt knotted tight. She began the kusanku kata, her movements rigid and precise, exactly as Kaito had demanded. Step, block, strike. But it felt like reciting a poem in a language she didn't speak. It was accurate, but it was dead. Then, a phantom vibration started in the soles of her feet. It wasn't real music. There were no speakers in the Shuri Hills, but it was the ghost bass of Kingston. A deep, tectonic dancehall rhythm began to thrum in her mind. Thump, thump, clap. Thump, thump, clap. Without thinking, Zara's weight shifted. Instead of the static, iron-rooted stance of karate, she allowed a bounce to enter her knees, the fundamental skank of the Jamaican yard. Her center of gravity stayed low, but it wasn't a dead weight anymore. It was a rhythmic pulse.
She threw a punch, but instead of the linear, snapping force of the dojo, she delivered it with the fluid, whip-like rotation of a dancer. She pivoted into a block,
her feet sliding across the wood in a move that was half karate, half bogle. She was no longer Zara, the failed dancer, nor Zara, the white belt student. She was a bridge. "The rhythm of the island is hard to kill," a voice rumbled from the corner. Zara spun, her hands coming up in a defensive posture, one hand a flat karate palm, the other a clenched dancehall fist. Kaito stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't wearing his gi, he was in a simple, dark kimono, looking less like a master and more like a spirit of the mountain. He didn't look angry, he looked fascinated. "Sensei, I wasn't being disrespectful," Zara panted, her mahogany skin glistening with sweat. "The silence, it just felt too heavy. I had to move." "You were not moving," Kaito said, walking toward her. "You were listening." He stopped and mirrored her stance, but he added that same subtle, rhythmic bounce she had just discovered. "Do you know why Okinawan tea was developed in secret, Zara? Because our weapons were taken by oppressors. We had to hide our combat inside our dances. To the world, we were just peasants celebrating the harvest. To us, we were sharpening our blades."
Zara's eyes widened. Like us, in the days of slavery, they took the drums, but they couldn't take the rhythm. We used the music to send messages. We used the dance to keep our spirits from breaking. Kaito nodded. "The bounce you find in your Kingston streets, it is the same as our grounding. It is the art of absorbing the earth's energy and letting it flow back out. You have been trying to replace your fire with my stone. That was my mistake." He stepped into the center of the floor. "The stone is the foundation, but the fire is the life. Show me again. Do not think of the kata. Do not think of the steps. Think of the yard. Show me how your people survived the storm." Zara closed her eyes. The mental baseline grew louder. She began to move, and this time Kaito moved with her. It was a surreal sight, the tall, vibrant Jamaican woman and the stoic Okinawan master, their silhouettes dancing in the moonlight. She brought the explosive, syncopated energy of Kingston. He brought the dense, vibrating precision of Shuri. For the first time, the cultures didn't clash, they spoke. The hollow feeling in Zara's chest began to fill with a new, hybrid power. She wasn't just hitting the notes anymore, she was writing the song. "Tomorrow," Kaito said, stopping as the first hint of dawn touched the rafters, "the world will come to this dojo to test our stone. They will bring noise, Zara, but you will bring the Ryukyu rhythm." As Zara bowed, she felt her heels grip the floorboards. She had finally found her route, and it was 1,000 miles deep.
Chapter 7. The Rivals Challenge. The silence of Shuri didn't break, it was shattered. It started with the low, aggressive growl of high-performance engines winding up the narrow Coralstone streets. 3 sleek black European sports cars crested the hill, their polished chrome glinting like bare teeth against the ancient banyan trees. They parked directly in front of Kaito's gate, the doors opening with a synchronized hiss. Out stepped a group of young men in high-end branded athletic gear. At the center was Kenji. He was barely 30, his hair bleached a sharp platinum, and his gi made of an ultra-light diamond-patterned fabric that crinkled like paper. He was the poster boy for sport karate, a multi-time point sparring champion who valued speed over soul and trophies over tradition. They walked into the garden without bowing. Kenji looked at the raked gravel and the weathered shisa lions with a smirk of pure condescension. "Kaito-sensei," Kenji called out, his voice sharp and mocking. "I see you're still playing in the dirt. My father told me this dojo was a museum, but it looks more like a cemetery." Zara, who was in the middle of her morning sanchin practice, felt the heat rise in her chest, a familiar Kingston-born fire. She stepped off the porch, her mahogany skin glistening, her neon blue hair tied back tight. "You have a lot of mouth for someone who didn't even knock," Zara said, her patois slipping into her English like a jagged blade. Kenji stopped, his eyes raking over Zara with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "And what is this? A tourist? Or is this your new secret weapon, sensei?
I didn't know you were running a dance studio now." Kaito emerged from the dojo, his face as unreadable as the stone walls. "Kenji, your father taught you how to strike. It is a pity he forgot to teach you how to stand." "Standing is for statues, old man," Kenji snapped. He signaled to one of his students, who brought forward a legal document. "The Regional Athletic Association is consolidating. They want results, not rituals. If your dojo cannot produce a champion at the Ryukyu Festival next week, the land will be rezoned for a modern training center, my center." Kaito didn't look at the paper. "The festival will decide what it decides." "Let's decide it now," Kenji challenged, stepping onto the packed earth of the training area. He looked at Zara. "If the girl is your student, let's see what she's learned. Or is she just here for the aesthetic?" Zara didn't wait for Kaito's permission. She stepped forward, her heart pounding a frantic, uncoordinated beat. She wanted to protect this garden. She wanted to prove she wasn't hollow. "I'll show you what I've learned," she hissed. They squared off. Kenji moved with a terrifying, jittery speed. He bounced on the balls of his feet, his hands flickering in a way that was designed to score points, not break bones. Zara tried to find the Ryukyu rhythm she had felt the night before. She tried to merge the dance hall bounce with the karate root. But under the pressure of Kenji's mocking gaze and the aggressive shouting of his students, her mind fractured. She became too much of a dancer. When Kenji lunged with a lightning-fast Kizamizuki lead punch, Zara tried to whine out of the way, a fluid, hip-driven dodge. But Kenji's movement wasn't a dance beat, it was a straight line. His fist caught her squarely in the shoulder, sending her reeling. "Too slow, dancer," Kenji laughed. Frustrated, Zara swung back to pure karate. She became rigid, her muscles locking up as she tried to use the iron-rooted Sanchin stance. But she was too static. Kenji danced around her, landing 2 quick point strikes to her ribs and head. He finished with a flashy spinning hook kick that grazed her chin, sending her sprawling into the white gravel. "Hollow," Kenji spat, using the very word that had broken Zara and Kingston. "You have the look, but you have no center. See you at the festival, sensei. Try not to let the noise distract you." As the sports cars roared away, Zara sat in the gravel, her gi stained with gray dust, her heart heavy with shame. She had tried to be both, and ended up being neither. Kaito walked over to her. He didn't offer a hand. He looked at the concentric circles she had ruined in the gravel. "You fought with your ego, Zara," he said quietly. "You tried to use the rhythm as a costume. You cannot perform the fusion. You must be the fusion. Tonight, we leave the dojo. The stone has taught you all it can. Now, you must listen to the forest." Zara looked up at the ancient banyan tree, the shame in her eyes turning into a desperate, burning resolve.
The air in the Yanbaru forest didn't just carry moisture, it carried history. Massive ferns, thick as a man's torso, arced over trails that had been trodden by rebels and monks for 5 centuries. The ground was a carpet of damp moss and ancient roots that looked like sleeping dragons. Kaito led Zara deep into a hidden grove, where the canopy was so thick the sunlight only fell in thin golden needles. In the center was a small shrine carved from a single block of volcanic stone, worn smooth by time and the touch of 1,000 hands. Kenji thinks karate belongs in a gymnasium with air conditioning and plastic mats, Kaito said, his voice echoing through the cathedral of trees. He thinks it is a sport of points and speed. But karate was born here, in the shadows, among people who had nothing left but their hands and their breath. Zara stood at the edge of the grove, her bruises from Kenji's assault still throbbing. "He was too fast, sensei. When I tried to move like a dancer, I was too loose. When I tried to be a statue, I was too slow." Kaito sat on a mossy root and gestured for her to join him. "Your ancestors in Jamaica, the ones who worked the sugar fields, when the overseer took their drums, did they stop the music?" Zara shook her head, her neon blue hair catching a stray beam of light. "No, they used their hands, their voices. They hid the rhythm in the way they walked, the way they worked." "Exactly," Kaito nodded. 500 years ago,
A different empire came to these islands and took our swords. They made it a crime to fight. So my ancestors did what yours did. They hid the tea, the killing hand, inside the Isa dance. They made the noise of a celebration to hide the silence of a strike. The dance hall you love and the karate I live, they are sisters born of the same mother. Resistance.
He stood up and handed her a heavy, unvarnished wooden staff, a bow. Tonight, you will not sleep in a bed. You will sleep with the trees. Do not practice your kata for me. Practice it for the ghosts. Find the moment where the bounce of your island meets the grounding of mine. If you find it, the forest will tell you. Kaito vanished into the mist before Zara could argue. The first few hours were terrifying. The forest was alive with sound, the rhythmic clicking of cicadas, the distant cry of a Ryukyu owl, the rustle of unseen things in the brush. Zara felt small. She felt hollow again. She began to move. At first it was clumsy. She tried to do the Kasanku kata, but her mind kept drifting to the humiliation in the garden. She felt like a fraud. "Stop thinking," she whispered to herself. She closed her eyes and let the staff hang low. She started to hum, a low, deep bass line from an old Peter Tosh record her grandfather used to play. Thump, thump, clap. The forest seemed to answer.
Steady.
The wind in the leaves began to sync with her internal beat. Zara's feet began to move. She didn't do a dance hall step, and she didn't do a karate stance. She did something in between.
Steady.
She moved with a one-drop rhythm, her weight sinking deep into the earth on every third beat, but her upper body remained fluid, snapping into a strike exactly when the ghost snare hit in her mind. She swung the bow staff. It didn't just cut the air, it sang. She wasn't performing, she was surviving. She realized that the Sanshin tension Kaito taught her was the same as the tension of a Kingston street, the readiness to explode, the power held in reserve. She spent the entire night in a trance of motion. Every block was a dance move. Every whine of her hips was a generator for a punch. She found a new way to breathe, a deep, resonant ibuki that sounded like the ocean hitting the cliffs of Negril. As the first light of dawn turned the forest mist into a veil of gold, Zara stopped. She was drenched in sweat, her gi torn by thorns, her hands blistered. But when she looked at the stone shrine, she didn't see an alien culture. She saw a mirror. Kaito stepped out from behind a cedar tree. He looked at her feet. They were buried an inch deep in the soft earth from the force of her movements. "The forest has spoken," he said, a rare, proud smile touching his eyes. "You have found the Ryukyu rhythm, Zara. Now, let us go see if the city is ready to hear it."
Chapter 9: The Fusion Demonstration. The festival stage was set at the foot of the reconstructed Shuri Castle, a massive wooden platform draped in crimson banners that snapped in the salt-heavy wind. Thousands had gathered, tourists with cameras, locals in traditional Bingata robes, and the stony-faced elders of the Okinawan Karate Federation. The air hummed with the sound of Sanshin lutes and the distant explosion of festival fireworks. But for Zara, the only sound that mattered was the steady, tectonic pulse of her own heart. "The festival is a mirror, Zara," Kaito whispered as they stood in the shadows of the wings. "Kenji will show them a reflection of their ego. You will show them a reflection of their soul." Kenji's team took the stage first. It was a masterclass in modern sport karate. They moved like a precision drill team, their bleached hair and diamond-weave gis flashing under the high-intensity floodlights. They performed a synchronized unsu kata, filled with acrobatic backflips, lightning-fast triple kicks, and earth-shaking kiais. It was spectacular. It was athletic. It was, as the crowd's roaring approval suggested, the future. Kenji finished with a high-flying 360-degree kick that narrowly missed his own teammate's head, landing in a perfect rigid pose. He looked toward the wings, his eyes finding Zara. He smirked, the message clear. "Top that, dancer." "Now," Kaito said, his hand resting briefly on Zara's shoulder. "Find the one drop." Zara stepped onto the stage. The roar of the crowd dipped into a confused murmur. She was a striking anomaly, a tall, mahogany-skinned woman with neon blue hair, dressed in a traditional heavy canvas gi that looked like it belonged in a museum. She stood in the center of the platform. She didn't bow to the crowd, she bowed to the floor. She gripped the wood with her toes, her sanshin training turning her legs into pillars of iron.
She began the kusanku kata. For the first 30 seconds, it was traditional, slow, agonizingly dense movements. The crowd grew restless. After Kenji's fireworks, this felt like watching a stone grow. Then, the rhythm arrived. Zara didn't change the movements, but she changed the tempo. She introduced the bounce, that subtle Jamaican weight shift. Suddenly, the ancient Okinawan form was being driven by a Kingston bass line that only she could hear. Thump, thump, clap. She transitioned into a series of strikes. They weren't the point-fighting flickers of Kenji. They were heavy, whip-like explosions of power. Every time she skanked her hips, she generated a rotational force that made her gi snap like a gunshot. Her breathing changed. She wasn't just doing ibuki. She was performing a rhythmic, melodic chant of breath that sounded like a dance hall MC's flow. Ha! Shoo! Boom! The crowd went silent. This wasn't a performance anymore. It was a spiritual manifestation. They saw the Blasian fusion, the resilience of the middle passage meeting the endurance of the Ryukyu spirit. When she executed a high block, it had the fluid grace of a head-top queen. When she delivered a reverse punch, it carried the unmovable weight of Shuri stone. As she reached the climax of the kata, Zara leaped. It wasn't a flashy sport karate flip. It was a grounded, powerful burst of energy, the Ryukyu rhythm in its purest form. She landed in a deep stance, her fist inches from the floor, the vibration of her strike causing the very stage to hum. The silence that followed lasted for 5 full seconds. Then, the elders stood up. Not the tourists, not the fans. The masters. They didn't cheer. They bowed. They recognized the tea. They recognized that the noise had finally been refined into a weapon of beauty. Kenji stood in the wings, his mouth slightly open, his sport looking suddenly very small and very quiet. Zara stood up, sweat pouring down her face, her neon blue hair messy, but her eyes clear. She looked at Kaito. He didn't bow. He simply nodded once. The hollow was gone. The beat was back, and it was louder than the drums.
Chapter 10. The Horizon. The morning after the festival, Shuri returned to its ancient, rhythmic hush. The red banners had been folded away, and the smell of gunpowder from the fireworks had been washed clean by a light, salty breeze from the East China Sea. Zara stood in the center of the dojo, her bags packed. Her heavy canvas gi was neatly folded at the top of her suitcase, the white belt coiled like a sleeping serpent beside it. She looked at her hands. They were scarred, the knuckles thickened by Okinawan stone, her palms calloused from the wooden bow. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't feel the hollow anymore. She felt a density, a weight that reached all the way to the center of the earth. Sensei Kaito was in the garden, standing beneath the ancient banyan tree. He wasn't practicing. He was simply watching the light filter through the leaves. "The flight leaves in 3 hours, Sensei," Zara said, her voice steady and resonant. It no longer carried the noise of her arrival, the frantic need to be noticed. Kaito turned. He looked at her Mojave skin, now darker from the Okinawan sun, and her neon blue hair, which had faded into a soft, sea-washed azure. "You arrived as a bird looking for a sky," he said quietly. "You leave as a mountain that has learned how to walk." "I thought I came here to find a new rhythm," Zara said, stepping onto the raked gravel. She didn't disturb a single pebble. Her weight was perfectly distributed, a ghost of the Sanshin stance in every step.
But I realize now, I didn't find anything new. I just polished the stone Pupajo left for me. Kaito nodded toward the dojo. The Ryukyu rhythm is not a secret, Zara. It is a memory. It is the knowledge that whether you are on a small island in the east or a small island in the west, the earth beneath your feet is the same. The struggle to remain unmovable is the same. Zara reached into her bag and pulled out the leather journal. She walked over to the stone shrine and placed it on the altar, nestled between the two Shisa lions. "I'm leaving this here," she said, "for the next traveler, for the next dancer who forgets how to hear the music." She had written a final page in the back of the book, beneath Pupajo's sketches. It read, "The stone is not the enemy of the dance. It is the floor. If you want to touch the sky, you must first learn to love the ground. The rhythm is not in the air, it is in the root. Stand tall, walk slow, move like the sea."
Kaito walked her to the gate. For the first time he bowed, not as a master to a student, but as a warrior to a peer. Zara returned the bow, her forehead nearly touching the coral stone. "Go home, Zara," Kaito said. "Kingston is waiting for its mountain." 24 hours later, the humidity of Kingston hit Zara like a warm embrace. The noise of the airport, the shouting taxi drivers, the clatter of luggage, the rhythmic patois, was a deafening symphony. Zara stepped out of the terminal. In the past, she would have put on her headphones immediately, drowning out the world with a heavy bass line to mask her own isolation. Today, she kept them around her neck. She walked onto the sidewalk. A group of young dancers was practicing near the bus stop, their bodies explosive and wild, their movements begging for attention. One of them, a girl with bright pink hair, saw Zara's blue hair and tattered travel clothes. "Yo, Empress!" the girl shouted, laughing. "You look like you come from far. You still have some moves in you, or you too old now?" The dancers gathered around, sensing a challenge. Someone hit play on a portable speaker. A heavy, aggressive dancehall track erupted. Zara didn't drop into a head top. She didn't do a split. She simply stood there for a beat, her feet gripping the Kingston asphalt. She closed her eyes and found the sanchin. She felt the one-drop beat hit her heels, vibrating through the pavement, identical to the vibration of the Shuri dojo. She began to move. It was a silent dance in the middle of a roar. She used the Okinawan grounding to anchor her Jamaican fire. Every sway of her hips was a controlled rotation of power. Every step was a deliberate strike against the air. She wasn't dancing for them. She was dancing with the island. The crowd went quiet. The pink-haired girl stopped moving, her mouth slightly open. They had never seen a Jamaican woman move with such peace, nor a warrior move with such grace. Zara finished the sequence, her breath a deep, resonant ibuki that cut through the baseline. She stood perfectly still, her roots reaching deep into the Jamaican soil. "Who taught you that?" the girl whispered. Zara looked at the horizon, where the blue mountains met the sky, and smiled. "The stone," she said. She picked up her bags and walked toward the bus, her rhythm finally perfectly her own. The end.
Thanks for watching. Join the connection. Hit subscribe for more Jamaican fire and Asian steel. Stay connected. Please let us know where in the world you are watching from. Thanks for the connection. Respect.